Hello, my name is Bob Tribe, and welcome to Valley to Vietnam. Valley to Vietnam is a joint effort between the Sacramento Public Library and the Vietnam Veterans of America Chapter 500. It is our intent to trace the arc of experience between Sacramento and Vietnam for our local Vietnam-era vets. Our guest today is Tom Knox, who was a rifle platoon leader with the U.S. Marine Corps in Vietnam and served one tour there in the late 1960s. And so Tom, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me.
You happen to be someone who came to Sacramento after the Marine Corps, very early, in the early 70s. Tom, let's start off, and you were born in Oakland.
Born in Oakland in 1946, and
okay.
My native Californian, and raised mostly in California, and went back east to college, and then ultimately into the Marine Corps right after college.
You also have a brother who was in the Marine Corps, John.
I have a younger brother who preceded me in the Marine Corps because he joined out of high school. He was 3 years younger than I. He is 3 years younger than I am, and so graduated from high school, didn't want to go to college, joined the Marine Corps, and served as an infantryman until he was actually very gravely wounded in 1968.
Right, and we'll talk about that a little more. So your brother was actually in Vietnam while you're going to college, and then you start Marine Officer Candidate School.
That's right.
And you undertook that where exactly?
All Marine officer candidates go through OCS in Quantico, Virginia. And so I entered OCS in September of '68. I graduated in June of '68 from Penn, and had the summer off, and then started at Quantico.
So tell us a little bit about OCS.
Well,
that first day, for instance, let's talk about that.
You know, the smartest advice I got was from a dear friend of mine named Doug Wida, who he was a high school friend of mine. We'd stayed in touch through college, although we went to different universities, and he took a commission upon graduation from college, and then went back to Quantico for further training. And so he had already been there several months when I reported in for OCS, and I stayed with him and his wife the night before I was actually supposed to check in. And I said to him, you know what I really want to do? I want to get up early. I want to get down and report in early so that I have a chance to kind of get myself organized and squared away before whatever's going to happen begins. And he says, bad idea. He says, the earlier you get there, the longer you are giving the staff to harass you. You're better off reporting in late in the day, and you're just going to cut the pain by that much. I took his advice, and I was absolutely right. He was absolutely right. I reported in. They shave your head. They put you in your these ill-fitting, we call them utilities. The Army calls them fatigues. Marines call them utilities because Marines are never fatigued. So
naturally.
So this corporal marches up, all of us brand new minted Marines we got these huge bags on our shoulders, marches up, and then we stand in the doorway of our squad bay, which is like the barracks. There's about bunks for about 50 men in there, and the guys who got there early are inside, and it's like a scene out of hell. There are all of these guys my age, hair, brand new haircuts, so it's just they're bald essentially.
Right.
Their heads are shiny bald, and the staff is screaming orders at them. These guys they're doing push-ups in one corner, they're marching around with foot lockers on their shoulders someplace else, they're yelling back responses to the drill instructors who are screaming at them, and they all have this sort of wide-eyed, deer in the headlights look about them, and I just stood there and looked and thought, oh my God, what have I done? And then before I could even absorb all the information I'm looking at, The drill instructor, one of the drill instructors, fills my entire field division. He's wearing the Smokey Bear hat that all of the drill instructors do there. The brim just almost hits your forehead. And he looks at me, and I'm looking straight ahead, just petrified, and he screams at me, "Candidate, get your scuzzy eyes off me."
Which would be difficult.
It turns out there was no place else to look besides at him. And that was my introduction to the Marine Corps. No snappy dress blues for me, not for another 10 weeks or so.
And so this continued over a 12-week period.
10 weeks.
Or 10 weeks.
OCS then was 10, I don't know what it is today, but 10 weeks then. And then at that point you were commissioned. You were a little bit more military in your bearing, and you had a basic understanding about the difference between a general and a colonel and how to recognize the insignias on their shoulder. But you were a long ways away at that point from being able to lead troops in combat. Right. So the Marines then had a further course, 26 weeks of infantry officer training.
Okay.
And you moved out of the barracks. You were an officer, so people didn't really scream at you so much. It was a little bit like living on a college campus, except, of course, you were out in the middle. We were in Virginia in winter, so we were hiking through the Virginia hillside in the snow. But that's where you learn the basics of being an infantry officer.
And in the first 10 weeks, you're learning to march, get in physical fitness sort of shape, learning all the rules of the Marine Corps, and
that's exactly it. You're learning the very, very basics of being in the military, but hardly anything that would serve you well in combat.
And once you come out of OCS, then just about everybody was going to go to Vietnam, I imagine.
That we all anticipated that would be the case,
right.
And I did in any event.
While you were in OCS, you find out your brother has been wounded for the second time. Is that correct?
Yeah, about 2 or 3 weeks into OCS of the 10-week course, we got off base. If you passed inspection, if your platoon passed inspection on Saturday morning, then you got off about 1 in the afternoon, and you didn't have to come back until Sunday evening. And I used to stay with this friend of mine, Doug Wida, who, as I said, was already stationed there, and sleep on his couch, and it was just a day away from the barracks that was really nice. Essential to mental health.
Right.
So I'm packing up to leave his place on a Sunday afternoon to go back to the barracks, and I called my parents in Philadelphia to say, just, hi, how you doing? And they had just within an hour or so had gotten come back from a weekend vacation of their own and found a couple of Marines waiting for them at the door to hand them a telegram and tell them about my brother being wounded. You have that telegram in your book. I might mention that Tom has put together a book called Letters from Nam, a family memoir, and it includes letters that his father, while he was a naval officer in World War II, sent home to his wife, letters from Tom back to his folks, and letters from his brother John back to his folks. And it's a great book. I really enjoyed it. I've read every page. But you have a telegram in there. This was the first telegram. There were a succession of them. But the telegram said as follows: a report received this headquarters reveals that your son, Lance Corporal John P. Knox, USMC, sustained his injuries on 20 September 1968 in Quang Tri Province, Republic of Vietnam, from hostile mortar fire while in a defensive position. You are assured that he continues to receive the very best of medical care. He will be kept informed of all significant changes in his condition. His mailing address remains the same: Leonard F. Chapman, Jr., General, USMC, Commandant of the Marine Corps. There was the telegram, but I have always been grateful to the Corps, and I know my parents were, that there were 2 Marines there who had actually been waiting outside the door of my folks' apartment all weekend until they returned from an out-of-town trip. so that there were two real Marines there
Wow.
to talk to them and to answer any questions they had. And then they stayed in touch throughout until it was clear Johnny was going to survive, which was not at all certain at the beginning.
And there's a subsequent telegram where they're very blunt, really, and say how grievous his condition is, and you don't really get any kind of consolation there that he is going to survive.
No,
Yeah.
no, it was pretty scary.
Yeah,
Actually,
I'll bet.
these two Marines, however, they actually, I get sometimes kind of choked up about it. They actually said to my folks, 2 or 3 days later, Johnny had been evacuated to a hospital ship, and from there had been sent to Japan and to the hospital, a naval hospital there. And these Marines actually gave my folks the phone number for the ward in the hospital in Japan, where my brother was hospitalized. And they called. My folks called Japan, and they actually got.
Could talk to staff there.
They got Johnny to the phone.
Wow.
Wow. His speech was labored, and it took him a while.
But he could communicate.
But he could communicate, and they knew that he was whole, he wasn't blind, he hadn't lost any limbs, and he would be home soon.
Yeah, but there was some brain damage.
He lost, his mind is as keen today as it ever was, but he did lose some mobility on his right side, both his arm and his leg. But notwithstanding that, he married a wonderful woman. He has 3 swell kids, one of whom is a Marine himself who just came back from Afghanistan.
Yeah. Well, I met him at your father's funeral, and he's a great guy.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that he was able to come back. So moving along now, you're going to leave OCS and you're going to head for Vietnam.
I went to a sort of Camp Pendleton was where they staged us before they sent to Vietnam. So I spent the summer of '69 at Pendleton, and I got orders toward the end of the summer. And in September of '69, I flew out of Southern California. We landed at Okinawa for a night, and got on the plane the next day and landed in Da Nang, which is where all the Marines were.
So you're in Vietnam now,
Yeah.
and so you're going to get your first assignment.
Well, I picked up a platoon. It's not like there's a long period to snap in. They just said, Lieutenant Knox, this is your platoon, and this is your platoon sergeant, and we're pulling out tomorrow. We're going into this valley that no forces have visited for the last year or two, and we're going to be looking for Viet Cong and enemy stashes of weapons and food, and so get it together. So the next day I marched out with troops and took command, and all the time saying to myself, is this really happening? Am I really in command here?
Right.
It doesn't take very long. I do remember the first night we were out there, we set up our perimeter. It was a company perimeter. It was raining. It was just raining horribly. It was just coming down all night, and I was wet and cold and scared, and it was dark.
Right.
And I wasn't sure I was really up to the task. But eventually you sort of get into a rhythm, and by the time, within a month, I felt like, all right, I can do this. I'm a platoon commander. I guess I better do it. There's nobody else around to take it over for me.
Sure. And how few people at 21, 22, 23 have this kind of experience? I mean, I've always thought if I'd never been in the military, the experience that you get doing this, it's more than you would ever get any time in your 20s in civilian life, or maybe any time the rest of your life.
I think that's true. I look back then and think of what an extraordinary experience it was. But of course, I was very lucky. I came back whole, unwounded.
Right.
Would I feel differently? My brother has never ever expressed any bitterness about his experience. Would I have been that large-hearted, that big-souled? I don't know.
Yeah. So you're going to spend 3 months out in the bush, basically.
I was a platoon commander. I had about a table of organization. You're supposed to have about 40 Marines under you, but we never had full table of organization.
Right.
We had about 30 Marines under me. I think the most the most significant memory I have is the day I was coming back from a patrol. Your days were just you patrolled during the days. You set up ambushes at night. And then you move someplace else, you did the same thing all over. I mean, there was a terrible sameness to the days. So I was coming back one afternoon with a patrol that was from my platoon. There was just a squad. There were 8 or 10 of us, and we're coming across a rice paddy, and suddenly there were a couple of shots overhead, and we all ducked down. We were in a column, and I was about 2/3 of the way back in the column, which is where the platoon commander is supposed to be so he can command better. And I looked up and I could see the guy who was walking, Marine who was walking point for us, point over in a direction ahead and to the left where the sniper was located, firing at us from behind a rice paddy dike. I ran forward and to get my so I could better see where the fire was coming from, and then I motioned one of our fire teams to come up around behind us on the right. These guys, without blinking, followed my command, came running forward and are sort of running around right end, as it were. They kept hopping over rice paddies until they finally hopped over the rice paddy where they saw the enemy, and they finished the mission.
Yeah.
And then we got up and went back to our base camp. And I guess looking back on it today, it is it's just hard to imagine that. And yet at the time, it was just another day at the office. That's what we were there to do, and that's what we did.
So you're out in the bush for 3 months, and then you get pulled in because you're the senior platoon leader.
I was the senior lieutenant, subject only to the company commander, so I became the executive officer. And,
right.
But before I went back to as executive officer, I think maybe the most poignant moment in Vietnam for me was we had a joint operation, my platoon with a platoon of they called them PFs, I think Popular Forces.
Yeah.
They were basically the home guard for the South Vietnamese. The South Vietnamese armed these guys and told them, you are responsible for this district, which is where you live. And their job was to root out and fight ARVNs. And our joint platoon operation was supposed to go through an area, make sure that all of the farmers who lived there and all the villagers had been evacuated because it was going to become a free fire zone. And we'd been given to understand that they had all been evacuated and would be taken, they were all going to live in more secure areas in country. Well, we went through there and they hadn't all evacuated at all. We had all these farmers and villagers who, if we didn't get them out of there, would sort of soon be living in a zone where artillery fire could come in at any time without warning. And so we had to evacuate them, which meant we had to tell them, pack up everything you got on your back, because we don't have any vehicles and we're not using helicopters for this, and follow us.
Right.
And so for a week, we picked up all of these peasants, and they followed us back into a more secure area. And this sort of that was what was involved in pacification. It was perhaps a good program, and it proved to be, I think, more successful than the silly search and destroy mission that Westmoreland tasked the forces with. But it also was, imagine that. Imagine you're a farmer and now you got to go live someplace else, and you can take with you what you can put on your back and nothing else. We got in that middle of that mission, we couldn't get any resupply for food, so we were getting pretty hungry. The clouds were low, it was raining, the helicopters couldn't get in. Finally, one of the Vietnamese soldiers we were working with shot a pig in a village, and we roasted the pig, ate this pig I can still remember tasting the bristles as I swallowed the pig meat. It's amazing I didn't die of trichinosis.
You were hungry.
But I was hungry. We were all
Yeah.
hungry. And the perhaps most poignant of it all was I came to a parting with the young PF lieutenant, who was a guy about my age and obviously, pretty sharp, and we had gotten through all the week not by speaking English because he didn't speak English, not by speaking Vietnamese because I didn't speak Vietnamese, and we didn't have a really good translator with us. He spoke French, which was of course the colonial language for the Vietnamese, and I had taken high school French. I would have studied harder if I'd known my life might depend on it.
Right.
But we said our goodbyes in French and wished each other well, and I've long thought my chances for coming out of this okay were a lot better than his, and I've often wondered what became of that young
Sure.
lieutenant when Saigon fell, when the North Vietnamese invaded and took over the country. Did he get out with the boat people?
So you eventually got out of the field. You were the executive officer, and then you were the battalion S2 or intel officer.
I was the intelligence officer for the battalion, which involved briefing the colonel every day at the briefing when he was there about what intelligence we had. Most of our intelligence came not from spies, but from radio intercepts. We would get from division or regiment above us a list of places where they thought there was radio traffic and about where it originated, and that told us that there was enemy in those areas. And my only my signal success, if it was one, as an intelligence officer was probably as much a surprise to me as to anyone else. At some point I had been giving these sort of routine briefings and pinpointing on a map where these radio intercepts were, and so we could send platoons or companies to investigate. And the colonel, or the major, who was the battalion executive officer, came to me. He said, "Well, Tom, I think you could do a little better on this. You're just sort of reporting what you hear elsewhere, but give some thought and analyze what is happening, and try to make a forecast about enemy activity in the area. What's going to happen? What's not happening? Not just what's happening now, but what's going to happen next week, next month." So this wasn't anything for which I had been especially trained. I just thought about it. I knew that the area where my battalion had its headquarters, such as it was, just behind a single strand of barbed wire, was right immediately outside the gate was a small Vietnamese village. And there was we did some amount of business with the Vietnamese out there. They came in and washed clothes and things like that, and and there was coming up some significant Vietnamese holiday. I've forgotten what it was, and we all knew that the North Vietnamese had attacked over the Tet holiday the preceding year. I said, finally I wrote it all up, and I stood up in front of the colonel one day at the briefing and said, "Well, here's what I think is going to happen. We've got this pattern of radio intercepts that looks like they're sort of they're growing more frequent communications, and they seem to be kind of moving toward us. And if I had to bet, I bet they're going to attack our village sometime in the around this upcoming holiday in a couple of weeks." And God help me, it happened.
Wow.
Suddenly, and our nights were pretty quiet. Suddenly, the village, that one night, the village just erupted outside our gates. There was mortar fire, there was rifle fire, there were grenades. We all, Marines all rushed out the gate to see what they could do. There was an Army advisor who, Lord help him, was actually living in the village, and I can still remember him running up the road wearing his skivvies and a combat helmet because he'd been bounced out of the sack when it happened. And then the enemy melted away in the darkness, and we may have found a couple of enemy soldiers, KIA, but for the most part, you know, you got up and went back to work the next day.
Sure. I know that business. I became the group S2, which was like a battalion, and so I had to do those same kind of briefings.
Yeah.
And so, but there's a lot of speculation. You're getting information from all kinds of sources, and sometimes they're counter, and so it is a bit of a guess.
Yeah.
But good job.
Yeah, and that's how we won the war.
Now, so then you came home. You got out of the Marine Corps in 1971.
I did.
And you went to law school?
I went to, you know, I'd never lived in New York, so I knew I had a friend in New York. I moved to New York after I got out of, my last year in the Marine Corps was at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. So I packed up, left North Carolina, went to New York, lived for a year, and most of a year, and then moved to Washington, D.C., where I found a political job for another 6 months or so. And by that time, I'd applied to law school, and I'd been accepted to law school here in the Sacramento area. And so I drove out to California in the fall of 1973 to start law school, and just really never left.
Been here since.
Been here since.
Well, we're glad you're here. And we're also very supportive of everything you've done in the community here, many of the things I'm aware of, but also, most of all, for your service, Tom. Something to be really proud of, and I know you are, and I know you celebrate the annual birthday of the Marine Corps.
I do.
So thanks very much for your service.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks for inviting me to this.
It's been a pleasure to have you.
Good.
That concludes our time on Valley to Vietnam. I'd like to thank Tom for his service and say welcome home to him and all our veterans. For Valley to Vietnam producer Jerry Ward, director James Scott, I'm Bob Tribe saying so long for now, and we'll see you next time.